You know, I've always prided myself on having a sharp mind. 72 years old and I could still run rings around most of the young whippersnappers at the local bridge club. I live alone in this charming little bungalow on Maple Street, and honestly the quiet life suits me. But about 6 months ago things started getting weird. And I mean really weird. It started small. My first clue was Sir Reginald. Don't laugh, but Sir Reginald was my favorite garden gnome. He was slightly chipped, wore a tiny little fishing vest and sat right by the welcome mat guarding the porch. One Tuesday morning I went out to get the newspaper and Sir Reginald was gone. Poof. Vanished like a chocolate cake at a church picnic. Now, I'm not a detective, but I knew I hadn't moved him. My memory is sharp, despite what my utterly useless son-in-law, Gary, insists. I figured maybe some neighborhood kids were playing a prank, so I bought a new, less distinguished gnome named Bartholomew and life went on. Then it happened again. Bartholomew disappeared a week later. I started doing what any reasonable person would do. I cataloged every loss. It wasn't just the gnomes. It was the good porch shears, the red-handled fiskars, not the cheap ones. My seasonal wreaths seemed to have a lifespan of about 4 days before they evaporated into thin air. And the Amazon packages? Oh, the packages were the worst. I remember this one time, I ordered a very specific hard-to-find yarn, a chunky alpaca blend, for a blanket I was knitting for my granddaughter Clara. Tracking said delivered, 1:30 p.m. left on porch. I went out at 1:45 p.m. Empty porch. Not a strand of alpaca in sight. I called the post office. I called Amazon. They all checked their systems. They confirmed delivery. The packages were dropped off. The only logical conclusion was that someone was stealing them. But when I tried to explain this to Gary and my daughter Sarah, they looked at me with this specific condescending pity that just makes your blood boil. Mom, are you absolutely certain you didn't just put the yarn in the linen closet and forget? Gary asked me over Sunday dinner, his voice oozing with fake concern. He even patted my hand like I was a senile puppy. Gary, I ordered a purple alpaca yarn. If I had misplaced a purple yarn package, I think I would remember seeing the giant purple package. I snapped. Sarah, bless her heart, tried to mediate, but she was useless. Evelyn, honey, the doctor said the change in your medication might cause some mild short-term memory lapses. Maybe you took the package inside and put it in the pantry? It happens. Happens? Losing a gnome and a wreath and 3 different packages in 2 months happens? No, it doesn't. That's a pattern. That's a thief. But the worst part was the doubt they cast. They made me feel crazy. They made me question myself every single day. I'd stand on my porch, staring at the empty concrete, running through my morning routine just to verify I hadn't hallucinated ordering a giant bag of birdseed that was now mysteriously gone. Seriously, I want to know if any of you have ever had a moment where everyone around you was telling you that you were wrong, but your gut was screaming that you were right? Drop a comment below and tell me when and where you're watching this video, because I need to know I'm not the only person who hates being gaslight. The final straw wasn't even a big item. It was a new set of gardening gloves. Plain cotton, bright green. I needed them to pull weeds before the book club arrived. I saw the mail truck pull away. I walked the 2 steps out to the porch 5 minutes later. Gone. Just like that. I remember standing there staring at the spot where the gloves should have been. The sun was warm, the air was still, and the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone in my neighborhood, someone in my little bubble of suburban peace was targeting me. And they knew my family wouldn't believe me, which made them even bolder. That evening, I drove down to the big electronics store across town. I didn't tell a soul where I was going. I marched straight up to the counter and asked the young man with the ridiculous dyed blue hair for the best, most undetectable hidden camera they had. I needed something tiny, battery-powered, and with excellent night vision. I was done with being Evelyn the forgetful. It was time for Evelyn the investigator to step up. This wasn't about the gloves or Sir Reginald anymore. This was about proving my sanity and catching the filthy porch pirate who thought they could play me for a fool. I was going to set a trap and I was going to see exactly who I was dealing with. So there I was back home from the electronics store, clutching this tiny little box containing my salvation. It was a pinhole camera disguised as a miniature plastic owl. Perfect since I already had a dozen fake animals scattered around my garden to deter squirrels. I decided to name him Inspector Hoot. My mission now was to install Inspector Hoot without anyone, especially Gary and Sarah, finding out. If they knew, they'd only say I was being paranoid, and frankly, I wanted the element of surprise. The installation was a whole saga. Seriously, these instructions were written for a genius engineer, not a grandmother who still struggles to sync her smart TV remote. I spent 3 hours hunched over my kitchen table, squinting at diagrams and muttering to myself. Finally, after watching about 7 different YouTube tutorials, the irony of watching YouTube to set up a YouTube-style revenge plot was not lost on me. I got it working. I hid Inspector Hoot high up in the eaves of the porch, nestled perfectly between a hanging fern basket and a forgotten string of Christmas lights. From that vantage point, he had a flawless, wide-angle view of the entire porch, the front walk, and the first few feet of my lawn. It was perfect. The ultimate suburban surveillance setup. You have to understand the dynamic of Maple Street. It's the kind of neighborhood where everyone waves, everyone brings cookies when someone moves in, and everyone assumes the worst crime is maybe someone leaving their trash cans out a day early. This sense of false security was exactly what the thief was relying on. My biggest challenge wasn't the setup, it was the wait. The next few days were agonizing. I kept the live feed open on my old tablet hidden under the magazine rack. I watched the mail carrier, the delivery drivers, the occasional dog walker, and most importantly, my neighbors. I saw Mrs. Albright next door, who's 90 and uses a walker, slowly retrieve her flyers. I saw the Miller kids across the street retrieve their ball. I even saw a stray cat nap on my welcome mat. Everyone looked normal, sweet, and entirely innocent. And every time I saw a package dropped off, my heart hammered because I had to wait and see if it was going to vanish again. I had placed an order for 2 things. A new, brightly colored welcome mat, a decoy really, and a box of specialty coffee pods for my old Keurig. The coffee pods arrived first. Right on the porch. I watched the delivery guy take the photo confirmation and drive away. I told myself, Evelyn, wait 10 minutes. Let the thief get comfortable. Those 10 minutes felt like 10 hours. I was shaking. I grabbed my camera tablet, snuck into the hall closet so Gary couldn't see me if he dropped by, and flipped to the playback. The feed was flawless. I watched the delivery driver. I watched him leave. The porch was empty. Then about 7 minutes after he left, a figure entered the frame. This wasn't some hooded teenager in the middle of the night. This was broad daylight. They approached my porch slowly. They looked up and down the street, their movements casual, almost like they were stretching or checking their mailbox, which was across the street. They lingered for a moment, adjusted something in their hand, and then with a speed that startled me, they bent down, scooped up the box of coffee pods, tucked it under their arm, and walked away in the opposite direction. Smooth. Calculated. They didn't even break stride. I zoomed in as best as Inspector Hoot would allow. I needed to see a face. I needed proof that would shut Gary up forever. As the figure turned the corner, the sun caught their face perfectly, and my stomach dropped out entirely. I swear I gasped so loud I probably scared the cat sleeping on my couch. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random opportunistic thief from another neighborhood. It was Penelope. Penelope Davies, my next-door neighbor. She lives in the immaculate blue house next to mine. Penelope, who brings me fresh baked goods every holiday. Penelope, who organizes the neighborhood watch meeting. Penelope, who, just 3 weeks ago, helped me drag my overgrown rose bushes to the curb for pickup. She was the picture of suburban perfection. Always dressed nicely, her kids were honor roll students, and she chaired every single PTA event. If you asked anyone on Maple Street who the least likely person to steal a $30 box of coffee pods was, they would have unanimously said Penelope Davies. The betrayal hit me harder than the loss of Sir Reginald. This wasn't just theft. This was an intimate betrayal of trust by someone I considered, if not a close friend, certainly a highly trusted acquaintance. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The whole time my family was telling me I was going senile, the neighborhood's biggest do-gooder was systematically treating my porch like a free retail outlet. I had my proof. But the problem now was, what the heck was I going to do with it? I sat in the dark of that hall closet staring at Penelope Davies on my tiny tablet screen, and I replayed the footage 4 times. Then 5. I needed to convince myself that what I was seeing wasn't just a flicker of light or a trick of the shadow. It was her. Clear as day. Penelope Davies, the queen of the neighborhood bake sale, the co-chair of the annual Christmas drive, stealing my coffee pods. The shock quickly curdled into a cold, hard anger. It wasn't the coffee pods. I could buy 1,000 boxes of coffee pods and not feel the pinch. It was the audacity. The sheer calculated nerve of it. All the while she was smiling at me across the hedge, exchanging pleasantries, asking about Clara's school, pretending to be a friend, knowing full well she was systematically robbing me blind. It felt like a punch to the gut but laced with glitter and passive aggression. Remember how I told you everyone, especially Gary, kept telling me I was just forgetful? This is the deepest layer of the conflict. I wasn't just dealing with a thief. I was dealing with a master manipulator who was using my own supposed senility as cover. And she was counting on the fact that if I did somehow catch her, no one would believe an old woman's word against the impeccably polished reputation of Penelope Davies. I started reviewing the rest of the camera footage, hours and hours of video. And there she was again. The alpaca yarn? Penelope. She slipped it into a reusable canvas tote bag she was carrying, probably claiming it was her own groceries. The red-handled shears? Penelope using the excuse of asking me if I needed help trimming my roses. Sir Reginald, my beloved gnome? She snatched him off the porch, walked maybe 20 steps to her own house and disappeared. I bet she put him in her own garden just to mock me. The pattern was terrifyingly clear. She never stole big, expensive electronics. It was always small, easy-to-pocket items that were just valuable enough to matter but cheap enough for me to look crazy when reporting the loss. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't impulsive. This was a long-game operation run by the neighborhood's most trusted face. I spent the whole night debating what to do. The logical side of my brain, the side that Gary would approve of, said, go to the police. Show them the footage. Get her arrested. Justice. But then the Evelyn side of my brain, the part that hates condescension and loves a good show, kicked in. If I called the police, it would be messy. It would involve paperwork, statements, and probably Gary running around telling everyone how he had guided his poor, confused mother through the process. And Penelope? She'd probably hire a fancy lawyer, play the victim, and say I was persecuting her because of some imagined grudge. And honestly, a criminal record for a $5 garden gnome and a $30 box of coffee? That seemed too extreme. I wanted vindication, not a ruined life. Well, maybe a slightly ruined life, but on my terms. I wanted her to feel the public shame and humiliation she deserved, but in a way that was simple, petty, and undeniable. I pulled up the footage of her stealing the green gardening gloves, the incident that finally drove me to the electronics store. She was wearing these pristine white summer pants. She bent down, grabbed the package, and tucked it into the pocket of her pants before walking off, confident and smug. That's when the idea struck me. It wasn't about police reports or lawyers. It was about those pristine white pants. It was about making a memory that the entire neighborhood, including Gary and Sarah, would never, ever forget. I needed a trap. A beautiful, messy, undeniable trap. The revenge had to be something that exposed her in the act, something she couldn't rationalize or talk her way out of, and something that would absolutely validate every crazy thing I had been claiming for the past 6 months. I pulled out my laptop not to call the police, but to start ordering some very specific, highly colorful and extremely difficult to clean supplies. Penelope thought she was playing games? Fine. But Evelyn plays for keeps. I was going to use her greed and her perfect routine against her, and the whole street was going to get a front row seat. The sweet, innocent facade of Maple Street was about to get a very loud, very blue wake-up call. Once the decision was made, no cops, just pure, sweet, humiliating revenge. I felt like a brand new woman. The fog of doubt lifted and I had purpose. Forget knitting that alpaca blanket. My new project was crafting the most glorious, messy trap the suburbs had ever seen. I went full MacGyver, but instead of saving the world, I was saving my dignity and teaching Penelope a painful, glittery lesson. I had 3 objectives for the trap. 1, it had to be irresistible. 2, it had to deploy instantly upon opening. And 3, it had to be impossible to clean up. First, the decoy. I ordered an empty, heavy-duty cardboard box and printed a custom label that read, Limited Edition Italian Espresso Maker Luxury Sample Unit. Do not leave in sunlight. The box looked expensive, bulky, and most importantly highly stealable. Penelope was stealing things she could easily tuck away, but the limited edition part was the bait for her greed. Next came the payload. This wasn't going to be cheap kids' glitter. Oh no. I ordered 5 pounds of the finest, most irritating microscopic craft glitter I could find, specifically in deep sapphire blue. Blue because it contrasts beautifully with pristine white porch furniture and, more importantly, Penelope's beloved white trousers. Then I mixed it with highly pigmented permanent chalk dust, the kind that stains concrete, and a generous coating of industrial fast-drying spray adhesive. The theory was simple. The minute the box opened, the contents would explode outward, the chalk would stain, the glitter would cover everything, and the adhesive would make sure that glitter wasn't going anywhere for a week. The deployment mechanism was my masterpiece. Inside the box, I rigged a simple lever system using a couple of strong rubber bands, a thin piece of wood, and 2 cheap party poppers filled with extra blue chalk. The lever was attached to the inner flap of the box lid. When Penelope cut the tape and lifted the lid, the lever would snap, triggering the party poppers and scattering the chalk and glitter payload with maximum velocity. It was simple, low-tech, and absolutely vicious. I spent the next 2 days working on this thing in my garage, treating it like it was the nuclear launch codes. I wore gloves, a face mask, and I even had to shoo away a curious neighbor, not Penelope thankfully, who asked if I was building a birdhouse. I just smiled and said, "It's a surprise for the neighborhood," which technically was the truth. The rising drama wasn't just building the bomb, it was choosing the perfect moment. I reviewed Inspector Hoot's footage again. Penelope was a creature of habit. Every Saturday morning between 9:15 a.m. and 9:45 a.m., she took her golden retriever Mr. Peepers for a walk down Maple Street. And 90% of the time she'd deter past my house on the way back, checking her phone. It was the perfect window. People were outside washing cars, drinking coffee on porches, or walking their dogs. Maximum public exposure. The morning of the operation, I woke up at 6 a.m. buzzing with adrenaline. I placed the finished limited edition Italian espresso maker box exactly where the yarn and the coffee pots had been. Right in the sweet spot. I made sure the box looked slightly vulnerable, positioned so that when she lifted the lid, the explosion would spray directly upward and backward. I retreated inside, grabbed my coffee, and sat by the tablet watching the live feed. The tension was suffocating. I kept thinking, what if she doesn't take it? What if the delivery guy comes and moves it? What if Gary shows up unexpectedly? But the universe for once was on my side. 9 a.m. Mrs. Albright is out watering her flower baskets. Good. Witnesses. 9:10 a.m. A delivery truck drives by but doesn't stop. Relief. 9:20 a.m. And there she was. Penelope Davies walking Mr. Peepers, dressed impeccably in a crisp white t-shirt and, I couldn't believe my luck, a pair of brand new tailored white denim trousers. She was on her phone looking distracted, but her eyes kept flicking toward my porch. She slowed as she approached my house. She glanced up and down the street just like she did in the coffee pot footage. She stopped, pretended to tie her shoe, and then very casually stepped onto my porch. My heart was pounding so hard I thought Inspector Hoot might pick up the sound. This was it. The moment of truth. I held my breath, watching Penelope on the tablet screen. She bent down and put Mr. Peepers' leash handle in her mouth, freeing up both hands. He was smooth, guys. He didn't hesitate. She glanced quickly at my front window where I was hiding behind a curtain, then she pulled a tiny, sharp box cutter out of the back pocket of those immaculate white trousers. The sound of the tape being cut was probably silent to the outside world, but through the camera's microphone, it sounded like a gunshot to me. She lifted the lid. The explosion wasn't deafening, but it was sharp. There was a loud, satisfying pop-pop from the party poppers, followed by a dense, sapphire blue plume of glitter and chalk dust that erupted straight into Penelope's face and chest. The fine, ultra-sticky blue cloud hit her square on. She didn't scream, but she shrieked, a high, strangled sound of pure shock and panic. The leash dropped from her mouth, and Mr. Peepers, terrified by the loud noise and the sudden cloud of blue chaos engulfing his owner, took off down the street, dragging his leash behind him. Penelope stumbled backward off the porch, covered head to toe in shimmering, permanent blue. It wasn't just on her clothes. It was in her perfectly styled blonde hair, clinging to her eyelashes, and coating the lens of her expensive sunglasses, which had flown off her face. The fast-acting adhesive mist meant every microscopic piece of glitter was now permanently embedded into the fibers of those perfect white trousers. Mrs. Albright, who was still watering her petunias 2 houses down, froze. Her jaw actually dropped. A young man across the street who had been polishing his classic car stopped dead, holding his chamois cloth. The neighborhood went silent, staring at the sight of the pristine, respected Penelope Davies standing there, literally painted blue, having just been caught red-handed, or rather blue-faced by a booby-trapped package. This was my moment. I didn't rush out immediately. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and waited 30 seconds, just to let the shame really sink in. Then I walked slowly, deliberately out my front door and onto the porch. I looked down at the ruined, blue-stained box, then across the lawn at Penelope, who was frantically wiping her face with her hands, only succeeding in smearing the blue chalk into a thick, horrifying mask. "Morning, Penelope," I said, my voice completely calm, maybe even a little cheerful. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror and humiliation. She couldn't speak, she just stood there, shaking, covered in the evidence of her own greed. "Looking for a package?" I continued, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Funny, I seem to be missing things all the time lately. My family thinks I'm forgetting where I put them. But I suppose I just had a little lapse in memory about where I stored this one." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, weighted by the stares of 3 stunned neighbors. "You know, those white pants are going to be awfully hard to clean," I finished. "That glitter really sticks." She didn't say a word. She couldn't. She just turned, leaving a shimmering trail of blue behind her, and ran. She ran across her own manicured lawn, through her front door, and slammed it shut, leaving poor Mr. Peepers still running loose somewhere. The resolution wasn't a dramatic arrest. It was far better. It was immediate, public, and absolutely definitive. The next day, Gary and Sarah came over, full of concern about the explosion they heard about through the neighborhood chain reaction. They didn't even have to ask. The blue stain on the concrete porch told the whole story. The porch pirate had been exposed. I never had to show them the camera footage. The sight of the permanent blue stain was enough. Gary actually apologized properly for saying I was losing my mind. Penelope never spoke to me again, which suited me fine. She stopped volunteering, and her house, while still tidy, lost a little of its pristine, perfect glow. Most importantly, my porch was finally safe. I started getting packages again, all my alpaca yarn and garden tools, and none of them ever vanished. So the lesson here, guys, is simple. Don't let anyone tell you you're crazy when your gut is screaming the truth. Sometimes the best way to prove your point isn't through legal justice, but through simple, petty, shimmering blue revenge. And sometimes the perfect neighbor is exactly who you need to keep an eye on. If you enjoyed this wild tale of suburban sleuthing and glitter justice, please make sure to like this video, drop a comment letting me know your favorite part, and subscribe for more stories of sweet revenge and unbelievable neighbor drama.